So this is the second video on chapter classroom assessment. In this video, I'm going to explain to you uh, what teacher-made tests are, their characteristics and features, standardized tests and its characteristics and features, what is authentic assessment, and few subtopics related to standardized tests such as reliability, validity, criteria reference test, and norm reference test. And some of the information will be recalling information from the first session. So let's begin with teacher-made test. The teacher-made test is, as you are aware, the word says, the phrase says, it's a test made by teacher. And as you know, since you have taken lots of teacher-made tests when you were in school, or even in many of the courses that you have studied so far, assignments, for example, the submission that you have made in this course, they are teacher-made tests. Then quiz that you have taken in this course, they are teacher-made quizzes. Now, you must have noticed that these quizzes or these assignments are made only for you. They're not made for students studying in, let's say, University of Punjab or University of Management Technology or University of Central Punjab or some other university in some other part of Pakistan. So teacher-made test is always focused on the students that he or she is teaching, because the teacher knows that he or she has taught this particular group this much content, and he or she actually focuses on that particular content. So the focus of teacher-made test is to assess what he or she has taught on part of the teacher, and on part of the students is what they have learned from the whatever was taught by their teacher. So in terms of reliability and validity, okay, let me explain to you the terms reliability and validity. As the word say reliable, so you must be familiar with the word, with these phrases. This car is reliable, this mobile phone or this brand is reliable, this brand is not reliable or less reliable. So when we say reliable, we are saying that it does what it is supposed to do. It has a certain, it has, or it meets, or it has met certain conditions. It has met certain tests. It has passed certain tests. If we look at the car, so there might be certain tests to evaluate its safety, security, and other issues. So if a car is said to meet all the criterion or the criteria decided by the manufacturer, set by the manufacturer, or by a state, or by any authority who is going to allow the car to bring that vehicle on the road or sell it in the market, then of course they have to check, look, this is working, that is working. So if a car is going to meet all those conditions, then of course that is a reliable car. So, so when we say reliable, we are saying that the test is doing what it is supposed to do. For example, whether you take the car out in the morning, or you take the car in the evening, or you take the car at night, it is going to perform the same way as whether you drive it in the morning or afternoon or evening or at night. The same is with the test. You are going to perform in the same whether you take the test in the morning or in the afternoon or at night or at midnight or midday. So the time is not going to affect your performance as long as you have studied, right? So whenever you take the test, it is going to produce this, so you are going to perform in the same way. So, but there could be some other factors that might affect your performance on a certain test, such as anxiety, right? External environments such as anxieties, family issues, personal well-being. If personal is emotionally disturbed due to certain issue at home, then the person is not going to perform well, even though the person might have studied, but because of certain emotional instability, the person may not perform that well as if he or she might have performed if the person has not faced or had not faced this particular issue at that time. So those are some other issues which might affect even if the test is not reliable. So in terms of reliability, a test is supposed to be reliable where whenever it is taken, irrespective of time, it produces the same, the students are going to perform the same. Their performance is not going to be affected because the test is taken at in the afternoon and the test was only designed to be taken in the morning. This is not like medicine, right? This is to be taken in the morning, this is to be taken in the evening, but that tablet is supposed to be taken at night. So that is not like that. So that is reliable. Excuse me. So when we say validity, validity is when we are saying, when we refer to the term validity, we are referring to that test is doing what it is aimed to, what it is intended to do. For example, if you remember the steps of designing a test, the first one is setting objectives. The second one is deciding the technique and the assessment items. So for example, teacher is teaching arithmetic chapter. And so objectives of designing any assessment is to assess students' assessment skill, arithmetic skill. Now, if the questions, so the teacher decides, okay, the technique teacher decides is, that's a test. There are 5-6 questions and students are given class test and all the questions are assessing students' arithmetic skill. So the test is designed to assess student skills. So as long as the test is assessing that skill, test is valid. But if, let's say, a teacher might have given 1 or 2 questions or might have added elements such as algebra in it, but that is not the focus of this unit or the chapter. So then that makes the test invalid or not valid because it is not assessing students' arithmetic skill. Right? So it is not aligned with the objective of the test, which is to teach students arithmetic skills. And of course, the test is supposed to assess their arithmetic. So that is invalid, not valid test. Right? So that is, so we said earlier, the teacher made tests are made by the teacher. They might be reliable because if students have studied the content, then where the students work on the assignment in the morning or in the afternoon, at night or early in the morning, it doesn't affect them. For example, if you have studied the first half of the chapter, you should be, and then you will be able to answer the questions which are asked in the, some of the questions which are asked in the assignment on this chapter. But if you have not studied, you cannot answer the questions. And so that is, if you have studied the content, if you have prepared, then of course you will be able to perform well. So so a teacher made test could be reliable, but it may not be valid. It might be valid, it may not be valid, right? Because teacher is focusing only on, it could be valid in terms that teacher knows I'm going to assess this particular content or this particular chapter or these particular topics. So teacher is going to give questions from that. So it could be valid in that way. But when we say, so in that small, in that classroom setting, the test is valid and reliable, right? But when we take that element of or the test outside to another class, to another school, to another setting, another country, then the test may not meet those conditions of reliability and validity, and there are reasons. And that is why when we say a reliable test and a valid test, it has to meet a certain set of what we call say prerequisites, right? And since a teacher-made test is designed for a small audience, so there is another type of test which is designed for wider audience, for large audience, irrespective of whether the test makers know those who are taking the test, or the test takers, or the candidates who might be taking a test. For example, let's say, and we call them standardized tests. Now, there are many standardized tests such as GRE, GMAT, SAT, IELTS, TOEFL. You can list, and there are IQ standardized tests, there are aptitude tests, there are behavioral tests. There are tests which actually are used to identify some of the learning disabilities, right? So those are standardized tests. Some of the tests are administered at a wider scale, such as GRE, SAT, IELTS, all those examination, all the tests which enable students to continue their study, or maybe the test that might enable an organization or a company to recruit a certain group of people against certain jobs that they have advertised. Um, but some of the tests are actually administered individually or in a smaller group, because the purpose of the test is to help that small group, such as identifying learning disability. So this is actually administered at a smaller scale, and the test administrator has to be present when the test is administered. While GRE, GMAT, IELTS, all tests can be administered without anyone being there, and there is a reason for that, right? So when we say that the large scale test taking is possible because the standardized test has met the criteria of reliability and validity. The reliability, that it is students have studied the content, whether they come and take the test at 9 to 12 block, and then they take the test at 2 to 5 block, their performance is not going to change, right? They are going to perform in both the blocks the same way, right? Valid because the test makers, they have um, followed a very rigorous process to design that test. So they must. So when we say that they have followed a very rigorous process, so we are looking at the process of how a standardized test is put together or made. So of course, the companies that are administering these tests, so if they want to introduce a new standardized test, then of course what they need to do is to put together a group of people, a team. The team is going to set the objectives. What is it that we want to achieve through the test, right? And okay, this is our objective. What will be the content of this? What is it? What is the content that the candidate must have studied when they're going to take this test, right? For example, when they were looking at SAT or GRE, then they knew that students who are going to take GRE are the ones who have completed their bachelor's degree, because they are going for master's and post graduate degree. So they must have studied bachelor's degree. So whatever content in terms of language, mathematics, and qualitative thinking, qualitative thinking, all of that, they have learned, they have studied some of it, and then they are able to answer some of the questions which are solved using quantitative thinking or qualitative thinking, or maybe a bit of statistics, language. So they decide, okay, this is the minimum content that students should have studied, or minimum number of years the students should have studied or completed a degree. And then they are the ones who are going to be the population, or the people who are going to take this test. So once they know, okay, this is the content, then they, of course, they are going to decide the technique, which is whether it is going to be a quiz, student constructed response, or is it going to be a short responses, long responses, or objective type, such as MCQ, true, false, multiple choice questions, and also all. So if they say it is going to be a multiple choice question. So the technique is a quiz type question, right? So then, of course, then they start working on preparing assessment items. They start preparing questions that will be part of that quiz. The questions could be multiple choice, true, false, yes, no, matching. So when they have prepared all the assessment, what we call the items, the test items, then of course the next step is to decide how many will be part of the test. So they have to see how long the test will be. If the test is going to be 1 hour long, then they have to see, okay, how many questions could be asked. Then they're going to look at the question. Okay, this is the question, and candidates might spend 2 minutes on this kind of question. So 2 minutes for this one, 2 minutes for this, 2 minutes, 30 seconds for this, 45 seconds for this. So then accordingly, they choose the number of question that will be part of that quiz. So once they have prepared, so they have assembled the question according to the time that they want students to spend on taking the test. Then, of course, the test is administered, not administered with the real, the correct phrase is pilot. The test is piloted on a smaller number of students. It might be piloted in a country or maybe in many countries. And then once they have the data, then they are going to ask those candidates also about the language. Were they able to understand the question? What is it that they understood from this question, right? So they are ensuring that the language is clearly stating what test makers want. They want the candidates to understand. So once the language is all right and the language is clear, unambiguous, then of course they roll out. And if there is some issues, they actually are going to rectify it, whether it is language, whether it is time, whether it is type of question. So so it could be that some of the questions are beyond students, what you call they studied. So if it was beyond what they have studied, then they might take those questions out. Or some of the questions might be too simple for them, so they might take that out, right? So those are the odd ones out, right? Outliers. So they are going to take those questions out and they are going to keep. So in that way, they are going to put together a test. And once it is finalized, then it is ready to be rolled out, right? If unfortunately in Pakistan, we do have what we call standardized test. We can call them standardized tests because it is administered on a large scale, such as class 9, 10, 11, 12 exams by the Board of Intermediate and Secondary Education all over the country. But we cannot call them, though they should be standardized tests, but we cannot call them standardized tests. There is a reason, because it hasn't followed a very rigorous process of evaluation by the experts. The test is not designed or made by experts. The test is, they've asked 4 or 5 teachers who the board knew, and or the board chairperson knew, or the committee who's responsible for the collecting or making or administering math exam. So they will ask some of their friends, okay, can you make maths question paper? And they might give him or her a certain outline of that. So many questions from this area, so many questions would be arithmetic, so many, the percentage of algebra is this, the percentage of geometry is this, trigonometry is this. So the teacher is going to design the test, one teacher, and then it is going to submit to then the committee usually asks 2 or 3 people, and then they actually mix and match different questions and they put together a test which you have taken if you are taking class 9, 10, 11, 12 exams. That is how the test is designed in our context. But if you look at the international examination, such as Cambridge International Examination or EdXL or other examinations, which are taken internationally, such as baccalaureate exam, IB, International Baccalaureate. So they are standardized tests because it has gone through a very rigorous process of evaluation, right? So it is not, it is designed by expert teachers. There will be teachers, but they are expert in evaluation. They have looked at lots of things. Right? So that is why, though the questions paper which are administered by the Board of Intermediate and Secondary Education, they should be standardized, but because it doesn't qualify on the parameters which are there for a which should be followed by a standardized test maker, so we cannot say that those tests are standardized tests. So standardized test is administered, could be administered on a large scale by anyone, anywhere. So the test maker do not have to be present in any country, in every city, right? So that is, and then it is easier to mark, right? The people who are going to mark those tests, they are given the key, even if it is, for example, if you have taken IELTS. So in IELTS, in the writing part, you are asked to write, right? So the first part of IELTS is where you're asked to explain a picture. It could be a graph, it could be something. Then the second part, you're given some kind of argumentative writing or descriptive writing. So you write that. So they haven't given the what we call model writing to the examiners who are going to grade your writings, but they do have a rubric, and following the rubric, they might look at grammar mistakes, sentence structure mistakes, coherence in flow of ideas and everything, and then they are going to mark it, right? So that is, so they are given, if it is student constructed or test takers constructed responses, then they actually prepare a rubric for those who are going to mark those tests or the responses of the test takers. So we looked at choosing an assessment technique by and we looked at whether it is going to be student responses, whether it's be multiple choice or quiz. So they have given here, in this table, they've explained that the test could be two types. One is objective, the other one is subjective. Subjective is essay, where you can write from your own perspective also. So especially when it comes to extended response, that is actually student constructed response. When it comes to restricted response, we are looking at define this, define that. When did this happen? When did that happen? How did it happen? Where did it happen? All these questions are restricted responses, right? Because here the question is asking students to recall specific information and write that, right? While in extended response, students are going to write more than what the content is. For example, in the first video, I gave you an example of the Romeo and Juliet play. So in extended response, teacher might ask students to compare Romeo and Juliet with today's teenagers. So Romeo and Juliet were teenagers in that story. So they did lots of things. They killed themselves because they wanted to marry, but since they belonged to two opposing clans, so they thought it better to kill themselves. So so you might find ask students, okay, how will you compare Romeo and Juliet with today's teenagers, right? Do the teenagers face same issues as was faced by, or as they faced, Romeo and Juliet faced? So then that, of course, requires student constructed response. We are going to bring in information from the story and also from psychology, sociology, newspaper clippings, some other news items, to support whatever they are going to, their ideas or their views on that, right? So that is subjective type or essay test item. The other one is objective items. You are familiar with yes, no, true, false. Choosing the correct answer from given options is objective test item. Then matching is also objective test item. It is easier to score. Objective one, it is restricted responses is easier to score because you need to see, okay, they have used this term, that's fine. But extended response, teachers should have a rubric to mark or to grade students' work, and that rubric should be given to students so that when they are writing, they know that this is what they should be. They should ensure that they have constructed the response around this criteria. so that when teacher is checking, the checklist is also, it is checked against the checklist provided by the test maker. So standardized test and teacher-made test. Now, we also looked at formative assessment and summative assessment. So the examples of formative assessments, you can see anecdotal records, which is teacher can look at students' responses and look at how students are. So teacher might ask students to write a diary or a journal every day after the class, so that where they can record what they have learned from the class, what was easier, what was difficult, what is new, all that. So anecdotal records. Quizzes and essays is also formative assessment. These quizzes could be summative assessment, they could be formative assessment. A summative assessment if the quiz is counted towards calculating the final grade, as is the case in this course. And formative assessment if it is a surprise quiz and teacher say, okay, let's see whether you still remember what we studied last week. It's a surprise quiz. So it is formative assessment too. So teacher is checking whether students still know whatever they studied. And then diagnostic test. We know, I explained to you that in the first video that diagnostic test, there are others such as placement test is there, diagnostic test is there. So diagnostic test is to identify the flaws or the gaps in one's learning, or maybe, for example, if it is a placement test, this is also kind of diagnostic test where the marks or the answers are used to place students into different groups, into categories. If you remember feet, if you have taken feet, then if you scored higher on feet, then of course you were automatically placed in CS major in what is that, business, economics, and biotechnology, all those majors where higher score is required. So they straight away went to that. And those who couldn't score higher, they were actually given other options. So they came to humanities and social sciences and other majors. So diagnostics, summative assessments, final exams, it could be quizzes, could be subjective, it could be we have midterm exams, we have final term exam, we have internship, we have interviews, then national tests. The NTS is there, National Testing Service. They usually have test for those candidates who wants to study after their bachelor's and they want to go for the MPhil from a local university. So they have this NTS general test, and those who have completed their MPhil and they want to go for PhD, NTS, National Testing Service, has a test, what they call subject specific. So those who wants to, for example, those who wants to go for their PhD in education, so they have to take a test on education subject specific. So that test could be, so National Testing Services there. And then also board exams are national tests, right? Because, well, we cannot call the local board exams as national tests because we don't have one body who is giving test and all the boards are actually administering the same test, right? So different boards have their own test making bodies or test making groups. Then entrance exam is also the summative exam. FEAT is entrance exam, as we remember. Then a lot of medical schools, if you want to go into medicine after your FSC, then of course you go and take that entrance exam. If you want to go to engineering, you go and take entrance exam. Different universities have entrance exams and entrance tests also, where they accept students on the basis of the score on that test. Right? So that is, I looked at objective and subjective assessment. As I said, these are the test items which could be part of objective type assessment: true, false items, multiple choice items, multiple responses items, matching items. Subjective assessments: extended response, restricted response, and essays. Essay is always an extended response item. It's also an example of extended response, research essay, all that. The other thing that I said that I need to explain to you, criterion referenced assessment and norm referenced assessment. So criterion reference test, as you say, there is a criterion. And if you meet that criterion, you are actually given okay. And if you do not meet the criterion, you are said not okay. Or okay mean you pass the course, and if you do not meet the criterion, you fail the course. So there is no 80%, 90%, 40%, 50%. There is just either pass, fail, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or not satisfactory. So there are two options available to teachers. So that is a criterion reference test, right? For example, driving test, they have given example here, driving test is there. So either you pass or you fail. So if you pass, you will be given license. And if you fail, you will be asked to practice more, or you might be asked to learn. For example, when I took the driving, when I went for my driving license, I was asked all the signs that were given, and unfortunately, I saw many of the signs that even in my life here in Pakistan, I haven't seen those signs, right, on the roads. For example, one of the sign was hostel. So, and I haven't seen this sign on the road where it says there is a hostel on the road, but they were asking me whether I can recognize this sign, right? And there was also a sign which was say there is a caravan place. But we don't have caravan places for people where they be going on the weekends in their caravan, and they are spending weekend on some picnic spot. But this is a country. So they were not interested to ask about the signs that I will be using on here in Pakistan on the roads that I will see. But they were interested to ask about any sign that was there in the book given by when I went for the what we call learner's license. Right. So driving test is one example. You have yes, no, pass, fail, satisfactory, not satisfactory. The other one is norm reference. So this is where what we actually evaluate, where we have on the basis of the submissions or students' performance, we divide students into different groups. This is a group whose work qualifies for A grade. This is a group whose work qualifies for A minus. This group goes for B plus. This group is of B. This group is B minus. So that is what we call norm referenced, right? Then each group, each norm has a certain criterion. In this case is the marks. So there is a mark range. If you obtain marks from this range to this range, you are given this particular grade. So that is norm referenced test, right? There are a lot of tests which they have given here. IQ test is also norm referenced, where they say, okay, your IQ is from this to this. So that's there, right? Let me see if there is anything else that I need to explain here, though I have explained almost everything. Yes, I did that. Okay, so the last thing that I will go about is the last aspect here on, which is in the reading as well, which is internal external assessment. Now, you have taken your metric and intermediate class 9 and 11 for exam, and that was all external assessment, 100% external assessment. There was no internal assessment involved. But if I remember my teaching degree, which I did from Karachi, so I went to a teacher education college. So the teacher education college has 40% marks with them. So when I went to the teacher education college, the teacher education college has 40% marks, and the university, which was Karachi University, they had 60% marks. So I took examination, which was designed and administered by Karachi University, but they calculated my performance against 60% marks that were with them, and remaining 40% marks came from the from the teacher education college where I was enrolled as a student. So that is what we call internal assessment and external assessment, where part of the marks come from the school or the college where you were studying, and they actually calculate your performance against your work that you might have submitted to your instructor, to your teacher, in different, for example, if it is English, so they might want to give certain credit to your work that you might have done in the school. So they might say, okay, 30% marks will be internal assessment and 70% marks will be external assessment. So if you are going to take English test, so the test will be of 70 marks, and the remaining 30% marks will be coming from the school. So whatever work you might have done over the year, maybe over 1 year, so teacher is going to give you a certain marks, which will be based on your work, on your performance. So the quality of your work will decide whether you're going to get 90% to 100% to 95 or 90, and then this will decide your final marks in that particular degree or particular course. Unfortunately, we do not have here in our context, even it is not there in Cambridge International Examination Systems, unless and until it is, if you are taking any course such as drawing, painting, dance, or in humanities and social sciences. Otherwise, everything, math, science, physics is all 100% external assessment. But this is not the case when it comes to the GCE, GCSE, which is the British examination system, though it is also designed and administered by the same examination body, but because of a different audience and a different education system, they have a different assessment system also. So where they have certain weightage given to internal assessment, and most of the weightage is given to external assessment. Now, there could be many reasons for not giving any weightage to internal assessment when it comes to international A levels, O levels. And the reason is simple, trust. They believe that teachers and the schools in Asian and African countries, they can be influenced by the politician, by the bureaucrats, by the rich people, by the polity, the ruling elite, and their children can be given marks which they don't deserve. So because of this societal structure, they might have thought, okay, we are not going to do it. And they are right also, because they know us. They have ruled this part of the world, so they know what they have made us into. Remember, what we are actually, the DNA that we have right now is partly to be blamed on the foreign rulers, whether they came from Central Asia or they came from Europe. So that is there. So I don't want to get into political debate here, but just saying that Cambridge didn't go into giving schools a certain, though they did this when they were calculating the O levels and A levels marks or the results in last year when we, though the pandemic is still there, but last year when they were calculating O levels and A levels score, the marks, then they used this idea of calculating the average, and they asked the schools who were registered with them to look at, to suggest to them a certain marks that they should be given to this particular student or that particular student. But they didn't, now remember, they didn't agree with the marks, so they were some kind of, I don't know whether I should say agreement, whether I should say a school might have sent, okay, this student should be given 80 marks, but the examination, they decided, okay, we are going to give them 75 marks, something like that. So the students didn't get what the school proposed actually. That was also, it shows how much they trust us. So we looked at teacher-made test and standardized test. And the last thing, I'm sorry, just coming back to the last thing is, the second time I'm referring to the last thing, is performance tests. If you remember performance tests, there is one more thing, which is authentic assessment. I need to come to that also, just saw it. Now, performance assessment is you have been taking this assessment and you have been graded against it also. If you remember your class 9, 10, 11, 12, you have practicals. Practicals are performance, right? So performance is where you are asked to set up a certain equipment and perform something. In biology, you might be asked to dissect. So you have to set your board, pin up a frog and dissect it. So they are assessing your performance on that. Though you will be asked to write the process, but they will come and, though they are not going to come and see whether you have done it correct, but ideally speaking, they should come and see whether it is set up correctly, right? So that is what we call performance test. And there are certain subjects, certain areas, certain skill which has to be assessed through performance. And as you can see, this is what you have been done in physics, chemistry, biology. And there are certain courses. For example, in this picture, you see this dance here, performance. If you're learning dance, then you have to dance to show or to prove that you have learned dance. If you are learning how to draw, to paint, sculpture, you have to do that. You cannot be given write an essay on how to draw, how to dance, how to color, how to picture, how to sculpture, right? So you can't. So you have to perform, so that on the basis of the output, you will be given a certain mark or a range. And that's what, if you look at, if you remember, every year, every school that is offering all these degrees in fine arts, in painting, sculpture, they have exhibition of students' work. Fashion, so they have exhibition of students' work, where students' work is actually looked at by experts, and they actually grade their work. Last, this is definitely last, is authentic assessment. Now, authentic assessment is assessment which is relevant to one's life, assessment connected with one's life. And an assessment which is connected to one's life helps actually students to learn more. And that learning is also long-term learning. If you remember the cognitive learning, the cognitive development, the schema theory, if you remember the learning theories, one of the element is how to take, the focus is to take information to long-term memory and to make it easier so that it is registered at the appropriate schema and could be recalled easily. So that is what authentic assessment should be doing. And how it can be done, it is up to the teacher to decide a test where students are not using the content, they're not learning the content of producing the content, but also using the content to make new things as well. For example, if you look at some of the questions which are given to you in assessments, in the assignments, some of the questions are application oriented, where I have asked you to give examples of this and that, right? So those are as actually a kind of finding out whether you can identify this particular aspect of assessment or motivation or learning theory or development, right? So that is authentic assessment. Authentic assessment is also another word for what we call project-based learning, assignments, inquiry-based learning, discovery-based learning. These are also some other words for authentic assessment, where students are working on a problem, and as they're trying to find a solution of the problem, they're learning the content and they're creating new solutions as well, whether it is inquiry, discovery, problem-based, that is all the same thing, which is authentic assessment. They're working on some authentic assessment task. The principles, authentic assessment is continuous. That's what I said. They are learning as they're working on the solution. So it is continuous, right? It's not that we have studied the content, now we are going to work on the assessment. It doesn't work that way. Teacher is teaching, and as teacher is teaching, students are also working on the assessment task. So, so teacher is teaching, students are working on the assessment task, and they are completing the task while teacher is teaching and supervising the work that they are doing in steps, in phases. So authentic assessment is actually divided into small chunks, small phases, small parts. So, and each part is built upon the earlier part. So that is authentic assessment, is continuous. it is completed over a longer period of time. It's not that it is given a week ago and the next week is the submission day. It takes more than a month actually. Then authentic assessment is an integral part of curriculum. Children are assessed while they're involved with classroom learning. As I said, as teacher is teaching, students are learning. That is also, they are working on the assessment task. So teacher is assessing as they are working on something. So it is not only that teacher is assessing their knowledge, but also how they are using that knowledge as well, right? Authentic assessment is developmentally and culturally appropriate, right? So that is, so when we say project-based learning, query-based learning, we are referring to a certain context. That context is students' personal context, right? Culturally appropriate content, problems, and also according to students' cognitive development level. You cannot ask class 8 student to work on class 10 content. So it is appropriate it is appropriate, or it is according to students' developmental level, which is cognitive developmental level. And then authentic assessment focuses on students' strengths, and teachers assess what students can do, what they know, and how they can use what they know. So that is, as I say, since it is cognitive development, cognitively aligned content and the task. So teacher is assessing what students can do, that what is their zone of proximal development, right? Can do is zone of proximal development, and what they know, which is what they know and how they are going to make that knowledge expand, or they're going to expand their zone of proximal development, and how they're going to use that knowledge. Authentic assessment recognizes that the most important evaluation is self-evaluation. So as students are learning and working on different problems, situations, given a scenario, they're learning about themselves also, whether I can work in a team. So they're social skills. So they're not learning about the academic, but non-academic stuff as well. The skills such as their ability to work with others, with the ability to work as a team, listen to others, taking in different roles. It's not that I have to be the leader all the time. Can I take up the role of someone who is supporting the others, right? Rather than I am the one who is going to tell everyone this is what everyone has to do, right? So students and teachers need to understand why they are doing what they are doing, so that they may have some sense of their own success and growth. So everyone knows that whatever we are doing, it is going to contribute to our growth and learning, right? Learning in terms of academics and non-academics as well. Authentic assessment invites active collaboration between teachers, students, and parents who work together, and they reflect and assess learning of students, right? Now, this is interesting because they are saying that parents have to be part of this learning process in assessment of learning process, but this is not the case in our context. This is what parents believe in Asia and Africa, whether it is Japan, whether it is South Korea, the developed countries in terms of economically developed countries. It is the parents believe this, since we have sent our children to school, so it is the schools and the teachers' responsibility to teach them, to assess them. So the parents are not part of the teaching learning process. But if you look at the Europeans context, whether it is North America or the Western Europe, where parents actively participate in, because the parents work in school as volunteers. They work with teachers as volunteers. They go and they might be working the canteen. They might be working as teaching assistant. They might be going to support a teacher. So whatever they do, they are actually trying to support the school and the teachers. So they become part of teaching and learning process. And they, so in some sense, they're also working with the teachers as they collaborate with the community and the teachers actually in the process of teaching and learning of the children. So authentic learning invites collaboration between, in our context, we are looking at collaboration between students and teachers and students, right? So students are working as a team, and that's what will help them to learn about themselves, right? They are going to learn about themselves, their ability to work with others, their ability to learn from others. So that was the last topic of this chapter. So I'm going to end this video here. Thank you.